The girl who cried everything. A story of deception, consequences, and the truth that finally freed her. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Ephesians 4:25. She was the kind of girl people trusted immediately. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the open face of someone who looked like she had nothing to hide. She smiled easily and made eye contact and had the particular warmth of a person who seemed completely present in every conversation. People told her things they hadn't planned to say. Strangers opened up to her within minutes of meeting her. She was the most convincing liar anyone who knew her had ever encountered. Not because she was cold, not because she didn't care about the people she deceived. She cared deeply, which made the lying more complicated, and for the people on the receiving end of it, ultimately more painful. Her name is Tessa Langford. She is 28 years old. And for most of those 28 years, her relationship with the truth was one of the most troubled relationships in her life. This is her testimony, not the polished version, the honest one, which is, given the subject matter, the only version worth telling. Before we move forward with the story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help us to grow this channel to uplift more people. Tessa Langford grew up in Boise, Idaho, the middle child of 3 in a household that was, from the outside, lovely. The outside was not the whole picture. Her father, Richard, was a successful insurance broker who cared very much about appearances, about what the neighbors thought, about what the church thought, about what the extended family thought at Thanksgiving. He was not cruel. He was not loud about his expectations. He simply made very clear, through years of small, consistent signals, that in the Langford household, the management of perception was a priority. When things went wrong, they were handled quietly. When someone made a mistake, the first conversation was about whether anyone outside the family needed to know. When Tessa's older brother had a significant problem at school at 14, the family narrative was adjusted to something more presentable. And the adjustment was presented to the children as normal, as just how things were handled. Tessa was 8 when she first consciously understood the architecture. She had broken her mother's favorite ceramic bowl, knocked it off the shelf reaching for something she wasn't supposed to be reaching for. She was frightened. She went to her father, and her father, rather than addressing the broken bowl, had said, with quiet practicality, "We'll tell your mother the cat knocked it off. She won't ask more questions." The cat did not exist. They did not have a cat. Her mother asked no more questions. Tessa had stood in the kitchen watching her mother accept the explanation and felt something she would later, in a counselor's office at 26, identify as the foundational lesson of her childhood. Reality is negotiable. A sufficiently confident alternative version of events, delivered by someone trusted, will be accepted. She was 8 years old. She filed that lesson in a place she would draw from for the next 20 years. In middle school, the lying was social. She was popular. She had the kind of face and manner that made people want to be near her. And she learned early that stories were the currency of social standing. She embellished, she exaggerated, she shaped the narrative of herself the way her father had shaped the family narrative, toward the most appealing version, away from the complicated truth. She told people she had met a celebrity at the airport. She had not. She told her closest friend that another girl had said something cruel about her. She had fabricated it, half from boredom and half from a vague desire to consolidate the friendship. The second one had consequences. The friendship between the 2 other girls ended badly. Tessa watched it end from a safe distance, feeling the guilt and simultaneously telling herself that what was done and there was no useful purpose in confessing. She got away with it. This was the problem. She almost always got away with it. In high school, the lying became more sophisticated. She had natural intelligence and the social fluency to manage multiple versions of the truth across different friend groups, which is a cognitively demanding task that she performed with the ease of someone who had been practicing for years. She lied about grades, upward, to her parents, downward, to friends who would find high achievement socially alienating in the specific way of certain high school environments. She lied about where she was on weekends. She lied about small things that didn't require lying, which was the detail her counselor would later identify as the most clinically significant. The lying that happened without necessity, that had become reflexive, a default mode rather than a tool deployed in specific situations. She went to college in Portland on a partial scholarship. She told people it was a full scholarship. She was not entirely sure why. College was where the consequences began to have real weight. She was 20 when she told the lie that she would describe, years later in her testimony, as the one she most deeply regrets. Her roommate, a quiet, kind girl named Heather, had been applying for a competitive research fellowship. Tessa had applied for the same fellowship. When Tessa did not get it, and Heather did, Tessa, in a moment of small, hot jealousy that she would later examine in clinical detail, told the fellowship committee advisor that she had concerns about Heather's academic integrity. She was vague. She used carefully chosen, almost not accusatory language that planted a seed without making a claim she could be held to. The fellowship investigated. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But the investigation took 3 weeks, during which Heather was suspended from the program pending review. The fellowship was delayed. Heather was cleared, but the delay cost her a key research deadline. Heather never found out it was Tessa. Tessa lived with that knowledge for 6 years. She told the lie that she would describe as the one that cost her the most personally at 23. To her then-boyfriend, a good man named Grant, who was devoted to her and whom she had told, when their relationship was young, that she had a health condition that explained certain things about her behavior and limitations. There was no health condition. She had constructed it from an article she read online and deployed it when she needed an explanation that would generate sympathy and reduce questions. She maintained it for the duration of their 2-year relationship. Grant organized their life around it, the vacations he modified, the future plans he adjusted, the conversations he had with his own family about it. When the relationship ended, not because of the lie, but for other reasons, Grant found out from a mutual friend who happened to mention something that didn't align with Tessa's account. He called her. The conversation was brief. He did not raise his voice. He said, with the specific, quiet devastation of a man who has reorganized his life around something that wasn't true, "I need to understand what was real." She did not have a good answer. He ended the call. She sat in her apartment in Portland and felt the weight of it. The specific weight of watching someone good absorb the impact of what you chose to do to them. And she did what she had always done with feelings that were too large to manage. She told herself a story that made it smaller. At 25, Tessa moved to Auburn, Alabama for a job at a marketing firm. New city, clean slate, the specific relief of being somewhere no one knew the accumulated weight of her history. She was good at her job. She was social and magnetic, and people gravitated to her in the way they always had. She made friends quickly, she joined a gym, she found a neighborhood coffee shop. She also started lying again, because the lying had never stopped, and the new city provided fresh territory. The lies in Auburn were professional as well as personal. She inflated her credentials on a project proposal. She told a colleague that she had heard something from a manager that she had not heard, a fabrication designed to position herself favorably in an internal reshuffle. The colleague acted on the information and made a decision that backfired professionally. Her colleague's name was Brianna. She was 27, new to the firm, and the backfired decision set her back 6 months. Tessa was present for the fallout. She watched Brianna navigate the professional consequences of information that Tessa had invented. She felt the guilt arrive on schedule and managed it with the same practice technique: minimize, redirect, move on. She told herself this was the last time. She had told herself that before. The last lie was the one she should have seen coming. It was a Tuesday in March. She was at a work lunch with 4 colleagues, and the conversation had turned to a community fundraising event the firm was participating in. The discussion touched on a local family who had experienced a significant loss, a family many people in the office knew. Tessa, in the moment, in the specific social reflex of someone who had spent 20 years shaping narratives for effect, said something. She said she had spoken to the family, that she had been in contact with them and could report that they were doing better than the public situation suggested, and that they had specifically asked not to receive visitors or calls right now. She had not spoken to the family. She constructed the detail for the same reason she had always constructed details: to be the person in the room with the inside information, the one who knew things, the authority in the narrative. 2 of her colleagues, moved by what she had said, redirected their own outreach plans, deciding to honor what they believed was the family's request for space. The family, who had been waiting for community support during one of the hardest periods of their lives, received neither. A month later, one of those colleagues ran into a family member at a grocery store. In the natural course of conversation, it came out that the family had been hoping for contact and connection, and had felt, during that period, conspicuously alone. The colleague came back to the office. She went to Tessa directly. She said, I need to ask you something directly. Did you actually speak to the family in March? Because what you told us doesn't match what they've been experiencing." The table was very quiet. Tessa opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. And for the first time in 20 years of confident, fluent, practiced lying, she had nothing. Not because she couldn't construct something, because something in her, something that had been building pressure for 6 years of accumulated weight, simply refused to do it one more time. She said, "No, I didn't. I made it up." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. The professional consequences were significant. Her manager called her in the following day. The conversation was direct and documented and resulted in a formal reprimand and a performance improvement plan. The colleague whose professional decision she had influenced with fabricated information 8 months ago had kept her own records. The fabrication in March was not isolated. There was a pattern, and the pattern was now visible to people who had the standing to act on it. She kept her job, barely, conditionally. She drove home on the Thursday evening after the second meeting with HR and sat in her car in the apartment parking lot and did not immediately go inside. She sat there for a long time. She thought about Heather and the fellowship investigation. She thought about Grant and the 2 years he had organized around something that wasn't true. She thought about Brianna and the 6-month professional setback. She thought about the family who had felt alone during the hardest stretch of their lives because of something she said at a lunch table on a Tuesday. She had been telling herself for 20 years that the lying didn't have victims, or that the victims were minor, or that the situation's resolved, or that no one was permanently damaged. Sitting in that parking lot on a Thursday evening, she could not maintain any of those stories. The victims were real. The damage was real. The person doing it was her. She went inside. She sat on the floor of her living room, not the couch, the floor, because something about the floor felt right, felt appropriately reduced, and she cried in the way she had been avoiding for a very long time. She picked up her phone. She Googled therapists, Auburn, Alabama. She made an appointment for Monday. Her neighbor, an older woman named Arlette, who brought her vegetables from a garden she kept with serious dedication, had been inviting Tessa to church for 8 months. Tessa had been declining for 8 months with the pleasant efficiency of someone who has a well-practiced answer for this particular invitation. The Saturday after the Thursday in the parking lot, she texted Arlette and said, "Is the invitation still open?" Arlette responded in 4 minutes with an address and a start time. Cornerstone Seventh-day Adventist Church met in a converted building on Sanford Avenue. Modest, warm, with the acoustic quality of a room where people sang seriously. About 60 people. Tessa sat in the back in the way of someone who is not sure how long she is going to stay and wants a clear path to the exit. She stayed for the entire service. Pastor Miles Henderson was 49 years old, lean with reading glasses, and the unhurried quality of a man who had decided a long time ago that nothing in the vicinity of a searching person needed to be rushed. He preached that morning from Ephesians 4. He read verse 25. "Therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body." He said, "I want to talk about why this verse connects truthfulness to community." It doesn't say, "Speak truthfully because it's the right thing in isolation." It says, "Speak truthfully for we are all members of one body," meaning a lie does not stay contained. Every deception injures the body. The person you deceive is connected to you whether you acknowledge the connection or not. And the injury travels. Tessa stared at the floor. "But I also want to say something about what comes before verse 25. He continued. Verse 22 tells us to put off the old self. Put it off. Like a garment, the old self with its habits and patterns and the ways it learned to protect itself, it is not permanent. It is something you are wearing, and it can be removed. She came back the following Saturday. Dr. Simone Adair was a licensed clinical therapist who had worked with compulsive behavioral patterns for 15 years. She did not use the phrase pathological liar in their early sessions, not because the clinical literature didn't support it, but because she knew from experience that labels deployed too early calcified rather than illuminated. She let Tessa build the picture herself, asking questions, reflecting, sitting in the spaces. By the 4th session, the picture was built. Dr. Adair said, "What you've described to me is a person who, at 8 years old, was taught by someone she trusted that truth was a raw material to be shaped for effect, that the version of events that managed other people's perceptions was more valuable than the version that was accurate. And you absorbed that lesson completely, not because you were a bad child, but because you were a perceptive one. Tessa looked at her. "You are not a bad person who lies," Dr. Adair said. "You are a person who learned a very specific survival skill in an environment where it seemed to work, and deployed it so consistently and for so long that it became your default operating system." She paused. "The goal of our work is not to make you feel guilty about the past. The guilt is already there, and it is already doing its work. The goal is to give you a new operating system." Tessa thought about her father and the cat that did not exist. She thought about how far 20 years of a lesson could travel. She said, "How do I fix the damage I did to people?" Dr. Adair said, "Some of it you can address directly, some of it you cannot. What you can do is become someone different going forward, and let that be a real and permanent change, rather than a performance of change." Tessa heard that distinction clearly. A performance of change. She had performed things her whole life. She was not going to perform this. Over the following 8 months, Tessa did 3 things. She wrote a letter to Heather, tracked her down through a college alumni network, and told her the truth about the fellowship investigation. She did not explain or justify. She told her what she had done, that it had taken 6 years for her to say it, and that she was sorry. She said she understood if Heather never responded. Heather responded in 2 weeks. The response was short and honest. She was not immediately okay about it. She needed time, but she appreciated the letter and she appreciated the specificity of it. She said she had always wondered. Not knowing had been its own burden. She told Brianna. Brianna was less forgiving, and Tessa received that without argument because it was Brianna's right, and the right response was not to manage it. She wrote a card to the family, the one that had felt alone during the hardest stretch. She did not explain the full context. She simply said she had thought of them often and wished she had reached out sooner and that she hoped they were healing. The family's adult daughter wrote back. She said the card had arrived on a hard day and had mattered. Tessa held that letter for a long time. 14 months after the Thursday in the parking lot, Pastor Henderson asked Tessa if she would share her testimony at a Sabbath service. She said yes. She spent 2 weeks writing it. She threw away the first 4 drafts because they were, she recognized, shaped, angled for maximum sympathy, structured for the best reception. They were, in the precise language of her problem, performing rather than testifying. The 5th draft was plain. It started with a ceramic bowl and a cat that didn't exist. She stood at the front of Cornerstone on a Saturday morning in May and told it without notes. She told the whole of it, the small lies and the large ones, the fellowship investigation, Grant, Brianna, the family at the lunch table. She told the parking lot and the floor of her living room, and Dr. Adair's description of a survival skill turned operating system. She told Ephesians 4:12 and what it had meant to her, the image of a lie injuring a body she was connected to, whether she acknowledged the connection or not. She said, "I started lying at 8 years old because the most trusted person in my world showed me that an alternative version of events, delivered confidently, would be accepted. I wasn't broken, I was trained, and I trained myself further for 20 years until I genuinely didn't know how to interact with the world without shaping the story." She paused. "The freedom I have now, and I am using that word carefully because it is exactly the right word, is the freedom of a person who no longer has to manage multiple versions of reality. One version, the real one. It is the most uncomplicated way to live, and it took me 20 years to find it." After the service, a woman came to her. Late 20s, well-dressed, with the careful expression of someone managing something they haven't said out loud. She said quietly, "I think I do what you described. I didn't know other people did it too." Tessa looked at her. She said, "Can I give you my number? I want to give you the name of my therapist." The woman took the number. She called the following week. That was the beginning of something new, not just for the woman. For Tessa too, who discovered that the truth she had spent 20 years running from was, on the other side, the most useful thing she owned. That her history with deception was not only a source of shame, but a source of specific, practical, hard-won understanding that she could offer to someone sitting in the early chapters of the same story. The truth that had injured so many things over 20 years was also what healed them. Tessa Langford is a fictional woman, but the 8-year-old girl in the kitchen with the ceramic bowl is not a fictional experience. It is the experience of every child who watched a trusted adult choose image over truth and absorb the lesson without being taught it explicitly. Most people who struggle with deception did not decide one day to become liars. They learned. They learned in environments where the truth was managed rather than told, where perception was more valuable than accuracy, where being found out was worse than being wrong. The lesson was installed early. It ran for years. Ephesians 4:25 does not address lying as an isolated moral failure. It addresses it as a community wound, for we are all members of one body. The lie does not stay in the liar. It travels, it lands in real people and costs them real things. The body is injured. But the verse begins with put off, a phrase of active, chosen removal. Not you will automatically be changed, not the habit will dissolve on its own. Put it off. Choose to remove it today and tomorrow and the day after that. And here is what Tessa's story ultimately teaches. The operating system installed in childhood is not your final operating system. It can be examined, it can be understood, it can be deliberately replaced with help, with honesty, with the specific hard work of returning to the people who were injured and telling them the truth regardless of what it costs you. The truth is not only what you owe other people, it is the most uncomplicated way to live, and it is available to anyone willing to put off the old self and try. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Ephesians 4:20. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified about more inspirational stories on redemption and hope.